3, 4, get my shoes and out the door. 5, I'm alive. 6, 7, 8, feeling great. 9, gonna shine, life is good. I'm doing fine. 10, gonna do it right and do it again, yeah. I look into the sky with all the beautiful color, but there's more than just for me, so gonna share it with another. I got to show, to give, let out. I want to sing and shout. Take a look and see a beautiful morning that turns into a beautiful evening, and together make a beautiful life. And if you wanna see, then come along with me, that's right. And if you want a good tomorrow, it's pretty simple, got a plan to like to follow. And if you do, you have a future real bright. And it's a combination of consistency. Come on and sing, oh, 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 oh. Come on, come on, come on and sing, yeah. Come on, come on, come on.
We're in this series about a beautiful life, and everyone's got a different definition of what that is, and that's okay. But just so that we're kind of on the same page, we talked at Easter time about what a beautiful life is. And so for our usage, from my perspective, it's one that's deeply rooted in reality. In other words, a beautiful life, one of the first things we have to get straight is that you can't just run away. And that's an easy thing to do, right? I mean, we do that. Now, sometimes it's physically, sometimes emotionally, sometimes mentally. We just kind of check out. And if you went to high school in America, you know what it means to mentally check out. You can be, remember those days? You can be anywhere you want to be, right? I can still remember, Mr. Everly, are you with us? Nope. Haven't been with you all semester. So it's work to be rooted in reality. The drift, we're going to talk a lot about drift today. The drift is to create kind of a compelling fantasy to live in. So that's the first one. It's also a life that's curiously open to the enigmatic, the mystery. You kind of look at things and you don't always have to understand how everything works in order to be in it. It's like, remember, talking about high school all of a sudden. Remember high school when you had to dissect things? It's amazing, isn't it? You can dissect a frog and understand how it works, but then it's no longer a frog, right? Now there's things that need to be understood and taken apart. I get that, and I'm glad for it. But there are other things that are too big for that. And sometimes we just need to be okay sitting and wondering. And so a beautiful life allows room for that too. It also is effortlessly conducted in new directions. And I love this. One of the writers, Peter, who is writing in a book that by his name, it's actually the second letter, 2 Peter, he's talking about how the Bible was written, or how the scriptures that we have were kind of taken down. And he says, holy men of God were moved along like sailboats. That's what it means to be effortlessly conducted. It's like, it's not like I'm not prepared for today or tomorrow. It's not like I don't have a plan, but are your plans subject to change? God, this is what I think is up, but I'm open. James says this, you're crazy. Those of you who say, today or tomorrow we're going to go into such and such a city and buy and sell, start a business, we're going to make a lot of money. Because in saying so, you don't understand that your life is like the vapor coming out of a teapot. It appears for a little while and then it vanishes. You ought to say, this is what we're hoping to do if God is in it. That's a different way to live. Effortlessly conducted. And then it's a life that's perpetually fueled by love. The great thing about being fueled by love is that there's no shortage of it. Now, we live sometimes as if there is, right? A lot of people live as if love is in short supply. Now that, my brain just went to air supply. I'm all out of love. That's how my brain works. So I'm not even here when I'm here. Mr. Everly, are you with us? Nope, still not with you. perpetually fueled by love. It's like a self-sustaining fuel supply. When we're connected to God, and we know that God is what? Yes. When we're connected to God, when we're connected to love, love fills us constantly. And as long as we're not closed off to it, which is what we do, we close off. If we're open, it fills us and overflows, and there's always enough. That's the beautiful thing about it. We're only stingy with resources that are in short supply. Like Charlie in the chocolate factory, who only got one candy bar a year, right? And he would break off a small piece, eat a little bit every day. That's not what love is like. You know, we can actually treat people in loving ways all of the time if we are being fueled by love. When we're not treating people that way, it's because we're not being fueled by love. And so the beautiful life is one that's perpetually fueled by love. Now, how do we get there? I want us to understand how this life works, at least my understanding of it. And this is just one take at it. But we've talked about this with these 5 different icons you've seen every week. I want to just talk about the first one this morning. How does this all begin? How does a kind of a reading and awakening begin? It often begins, from my experience, it often begins with an experience which uncovers inadequacies in our way of being human. In other words, something happens we don't understand. Now, it can be painful. It can be beautiful. The more overwhelming it is, painful or beautiful, the more we come to the end of ourself and go, okay, I thought I understood how life worked, but I don't. I've never experienced anything like this. Now, normally for me, it's pain. I can remember the very first time that I experienced this, at least experienced it in an overwhelming, question everything I know kind of way. Can you remember that for you? What was it? I was going to say for me it was the death of my sister, but it wasn't, interestingly. It was trying to figure out what to say because I was conducting the funeral for my sister, which is an unfair thing that she asked me to do before she passed. And just going, got nothing here, God. That's the kind of experience I'm talking about. Now, this experience, again, is usually one of pain or beauty, and we experience enough of either, we'll begin to ask questions. That's what happens. If you're not asking questions, like big questions, and it's okay to ask why questions, like a toddler. Kim, are you inundated with why questions? I thought of you immediately. Why? See, those are good questions. And the best answer is, of course, because I'm the mother. Right? If you're not asking these kind of questions, it's because you're either not experiencing a pain or a beauty strong enough, or you've just checked out and created a fantasy world for yourself. Now, I have understood that the story of Israel is really instructive here. One of the beginning stories of Israel. Now, by the way, and by this I mean kind of the big overriding story, the story of this group of people enslaved in Egypt, right? 400 years, they're slaves. And by the way, that started well. I want you to see this idea. The story of Israel is our story. They didn't become slaves because they wanted to be slaves, right? How did they get to Egypt? Anybody remember? Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat story, right? There was a famine in the whole world. Joseph was in Egypt. He created this amazing plan to store food, and his brothers came down to Egypt because there was food. 400 years later, what started out really well, now this group of probably 1 million, maybe 2 million people, are a slave nation under the Egyptian overlord, and that's our story. Moses shows up, right? Tries to do things on his own, doesn't go well, exiled for 40 years, and then he begins to ask the right questions. Remember, God shows up in this burning bush, and I want you to hear me say, as I've said it before, I think that bush was burning every night and day for all of Moses' life. But until he's ready to notice that it's burning, he doesn't see it. See, that's us. Every day is an endless stream of cigarettes and magazines. Right? Each town looks the same to me, the movies and the factories. We just kind of drift through. And then something happens, and we go, oh, look at that. And God's like, dude, I love that. So Moses gets kind of inscripted by God to go and deliver Israel. He does. And then Israel wanders for 40 years, and then comes the Promised Land. That's our story. We're enslaved by something. God shows up, gets us out of it. We kind of struggle a little bit, and then we begin to kind of put things together. That's not just Israel's story. That's the story of humanity, at least how it could go. That's our story. Now, in that story, just before Moses is about to die, he gives us the following words. Moses had a hard one, a hard life. He's instructed to kind of bring these people out of Egypt and lead them. That whole thing turns into a 40-year debacle. And Moses is having temper trouble. Anybody? Moses is like, okay, I'm out, I'm done. And so people are complaining all the time. Like a massive whining. We don't like the food. There's not enough water. My feet hurt. I mean, it's like going on vacation with a group of toddlers, right? And so Moses is instructed by God, okay, Moses, take your staff, go over and touch that rock, and water will come out of it. And Moses, on the way to the rock, hears more grumbling, and he's so ticked off that he takes the staff and he says, okay, I am sick of you people. Here, you want water? And he smashes the rock with the staff, splits the rock in two. Water still comes gushing out. And God says, dude, I've talked to you about this temper thing so long. I'm tired of it. You're not going into the Promised Land. You can see it. You're not going in. I'm sorry. Now, at first I thought to myself, gosh, that was mean. But see, that's what we do. We keep ourselves from the beautiful life because we can't get a handle on the crap that keeps us out of it. See, it wasn't God saying Moses couldn't go in. Really. We can't go in because we can't get a handle on our anger. We can't get a handle on our addictions. We can't get a handle on whatever it is. And we keep ourselves from this life of beauty and kind of provision, not because God doesn't want us to go in, but because we're just too busy striking rocks all over the place. So Moses knows that he can't go in, and he comes to Israel and he says this. He gives them this great law. He says, listen, for 400 years you were slaves. For 40 years you've been disconnected and wandering. Now there's a choice. Joshua is going to bring you into this beautiful land. And he says this. This is Deuteronomy chapter 30. It should come up on the screen. Listen. He says this. This day I call the heavens and the earth as witnesses against you that I have set before you life and death, blessings and cursings. In other words, what Moses said was, here's a beautiful way to live. If you live this way, you will have a beautiful life. Here's an ugly way to live. If you live this way, you will have a life that feels like it's been cursed. Now choose life so that you and your children may live and that you may love the Lord your God. Listen to His voice and hold fast to Him. For the Lord is your life, and He will give you many years in the land He swore to give to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Look at this. Look at this. I can't get this out of my mind. Choose life. What does that mean? Choose life. Means don't settle. Choose life. It means it's available to you. See, that's the amazing thing. We get ourselves to a point where we think we can't have the life. The life. But the life is always available to us. Always available to us. What life? Beautiful life. The life that we were designed for. The life that would fit us like Cinderella's slipper. How do we choose life? Whoops. I got a new toy. How do we choose life? Well, God helps us. And one of the biggest ways He helps us, I think, is by making it tough. Life is hard. Now, not always. By coming to the understanding that there are difficulties in this life and that difficulties generate points of decision. So the status quo. I hate the status quo. You know what the status quo is, right? It's a Latin phrase. It just means the existing state of affairs. It's what Jesus came to fight against. And I love the way Jesus does it time and time again. And in fact, right in His best sermon, He says, "You've heard it said," and this is the standard understanding of the law, "but I say unto you." You've heard it said, but I say unto you. Status quo, new way of thinking. Status quo, change the way you think about everything. Status quo, if you want to live in that, you're not going to have the kind of life you really want. Because our systems of thought are perfectly designed to give us the life that we're now living, right? Perfectly designed. The life that you're now living is not an accident. It's not like God went, "Oh my gosh, I forgot about Michael Caldwell." Like there's a pot on the back of the stove, right? Boiling over. Michael! No. Not at all. He's intimately involved every moment. Jesus said it. God is at work all the time, everywhere, John 5. And I'm joining Him in His work. Your life isn't accidentally the way it is. Now, I certainly don't want to suggest that if you've been taken advantage of or abused, there's pain that's not your fault. Of course. But the way you process that, that's up to you. When did you realize, this is kind of a loaded question, when did you realize that you can't keep blaming your problems on your mother? Was it 25? 35, 45, 55. Well, you know, I had it really tough growing up. So what? You haven't lived in that house for 40 years. Process it. Right? I get it. I'm so lucky in my upbringing, and I don't take it for granted. And some of us weren't, and I don't take that lightly. But we have to process it, friends. We have to choose life. We have to stop just drifting. Status quo. Difficulties interrupt the drift of the status quo life. That's why I love difficulties. Because it tests your mettle. It wakes you up. It's like cold water in the face. That's what a difficulty can be if we let it. We start asking questions. And the wrong one is, okay, what do I have to do to get back to me just drifting? How do I fix this so I can just go back to my life? But if we start asking good questions like, wait a second, what's really going on here? What is it that I really want? What's really important? Who am I really? No, I mean really. Who am I really? No. Really. Not, I don't want to know what you do or what you're good at, but who are you? Difficulties generate decision points. You can't escape it. Now, you can, actually. You can. You can just say, going to pretend like this didn't happen. Now, difficulties can be self-generated or of no fault of our own. This is what I love about God. I can even cause the difficulty, and He can still use it to help me. Right? Like, you go, okay, well, if a difficulty happens, that's not my fault. Like, I got fired unjustly. I can see how that would help me. But if I'm the one that caused the divorce, or if I was doing something stupid and got fired, or if I, then how can God use that one? Well, this great story comes to mind called the prodigal son. Remember that? Luke 15. Luke chapter 15, verses 11 to 32. A certain man had 2 sons. And the youngest son came to his father and said, "Father, give me my share of the estate. I want it now." And so the father divided the estate up between the 2 sons. And the very next morning, the younger son got up and left and wasted all he had gotten on wild living. About that time, Luke says, a famine broke out, and the young man's money was gone. And so he took a job in a far country feeding pigs in a pigsty. And it is there in the pigsty that what happens? According to Luke, he came to his senses. If his money wouldn't have run out, would he have come to his senses? No way, man. He would have just bought another round for everybody. Of course, he would have woken up with a hangover, but he would have gotten rid of that fast. But his money runs out. Now, he put himself in that position. Difficulty makes him come to himself. And that's a beautiful phrase. It's a beautiful phrase in the original language. It's translated, he came to his senses. What literally it means, the young man came to himself. This is the process of life. Beginning to become who I am. That's all there is. Right there. That's all there is. And if I had the time, I could go from the beginning of the Bible all the way till the end and other great wisdom literature. I mean, example after example after example. But if you look at Moses' story that we just referred to earlier, he thought he was the great deliverer, right? By the strength of my arm, I will deliver God's people. Now, he had it close, but that wasn't really his identity. Jesus. You want to see Jesus coming out identity party? It's beautiful. Read Matthew chapter 4. Jesus is baptized by John the Baptist, and then the Spirit leads him into the wilderness, and for 40 days he's alone, praying, fasting, and then the tempter came to him. And what was it about? What were the temptations about? What was the question that the tempter asked? If you're really the Son of God. It's always about identity. And it's always this. And I have to tell you, the tempter of my ego is the biggest tempter I have. If you're really the Son of God, prove it. That's what he said. Prove it. Make these stones bread. Cast yourself off from the temple. Prove it. And what does Jesus say? I am, and I don't have to. Why? Because I know I am. Friends, when you get to the place where you know who you are, and you have to, and your ability, not your ability, but your temptation to prove it to everybody goes away, you're free. This is one of the great things about having my knee surgery for me. And I have to tell you, this is a difficult thing. Because my identity is wrapped up in my physicality, my athletic ability. And it's like, that's that. Now, doesn't mean I'm a cripple, right? No. But No more men's rec league basketball, and we know that's the most important thing in the world. So I don't have to prove that anymore, or do I? Prodigal son story. Now, meanwhile, back at the ranch, right? This is a great place to insert that. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, you have the older son and the father. And the father is waiting for the younger son to return, and when he does, he embraces him. Throws a party for him. The older son hears the party going on and comes in from the field. You see what Jesus is doing? Dutiful. And he says, hey, what's going on around here? Well, your brother's come back, and your father's throwing a party. And what does the older son get? Completely torqued. What? Finds his father. This younger son took your money and spent it on wild living, and he's come back. He's trashed our name, and because he says, oh, I'm sorry, you're throwing him a party? You've never thrown me a party. Wow. See, that's what status quo will get you. Every day's an endless stream of cigarettes and magazines. Get up, do what you do, go to bed. Get up, do what you do, go to bed. At least the younger son was alive, right? Father looks at him and says, everything I have is yours. You could have had a party any day you wanted it. I love that. One of my mottos. If you want a party, throw a party. You don't need an excuse. Just have a party. Invite some people over or not. Pull the shades, pretend you're not home, and have a party. Favorite kind of party. Status quo allowed the older son to remain unaware of who he really was. See, do you understand how important these stories are? And the stories aren't the stories. The stories are our story. This older kid was buried beneath his duty to his father. It was pride. I'm not the one who ran away. I'm the one who's doing the farming. I'm the one who's responsible. I'm the one. And he didn't even know who he was or what was at his disposal. What a story. See, there's two prodigal sons. One came back. The other didn't even know he was gone. Right? Storm on the sea story, Mark chapter 4. I love this story. Jesus just has his long day of teaching, and he says to the guys, listen, one of you guys has a boat, right? Yeah, I have a boat. Good, get it. Let's get out of here. I'm exhausted. Let's go to the other side of the lake where they don't know what's going on. Let's just take a little bit of a break. And so, 13 guys in this boat. Mark says Jesus was asleep on a cushion in the stern. That's a pretty big boat. Storm rolls up, right? You know the story. And in fact, the language in the story in Mark is just this great gospel writer because he's all of these verbs. He's like the ADD gospel. It's short and full of activity, and the waves are crashing into the boat, and these guys, several of them, do what for a living? That's right. They're used to the nautical life. From the time they were young till that day, they were fishermen. They knew how to handle a boat, but they had apparently never seen a storm like this or never been in the middle of the Sea of Galilee on a day like this. Now, when you think the Sea of Galilee, think Lake Tahoe. You know, you've been to Tahoe where it has its own weather going on out there in the middle of the lake? It's exactly what happens in the Sea of Galilee. About the same size, very deep, and it creates weird things out there in the middle of the lake. Well, they were in the middle of one. And so Jesus is asleep. Waves are crashing in. And the disciples wake him up. And they say this to him. So it's a storm, right? They're in the middle of a storm. Lord, don't you care if we drown? And that's what we say when we're in the middle of a storm. God, I thought you loved me. And that's a good question, by the way, to ask God. It's a good question if you realize that it's a stupid question. But it's a good question to ask. So here's the one, the only anchor I really have in my life is this. There is a God, and that God loves me. From that point on, all bets are off. But that point, I choose to believe it. That's what faith is. That's what I believe. And so if I'm in the boat and Jesus is asleep in the boat, I'm thinking, I don't have much to worry about. Right? I'm with him. He's in charge. I love that. But that's not, these guys are, and so Jesus gets up. Now, you know what you're like when you wake up from a nap. I know what you're like. When you get woken up prematurely from a nap. Remember those naps that you take when you wake up and you're not really sure where you are? Love that. And so that's Jesus, and he gets up and he kind of shakes himself, and he comes out to the front of the boat, and he looks at these guys with really, he's not very happy. And he looks at the weather and says, stop, peace, be still. And the waves calm down. And then he looks at the men and he says, oh, you who have little faith, I don't know how much longer I can put up with this. That's what he says. And then the disciples start asking a question. Now, here's the question that they ask. Who is this that even the wind and the waves obey him? I used to think that if what Jesus was referring to was their lack of faith, and if they had faith, they could make the waves stop. That's what I used to think, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to, it's kind of nice at a party, like Jedi. You do not want to take the last rib. And then you just slip into line. I don't think that's what he meant. This is what faith does. Faith does not need to stop the storm. Faith takes a nap when the storm does its worst. That's what it does. Peace. Trust. Trust. For some people, the only way to be okay is on calm seas. And so, when it's calm, they're fine. When it's not calm, they're either coming apart at the seams or they create an alternate universe that is calm. And that alternate universe is where we get in big trouble. Because you know who's not in that alternate universe? God. God is ever present in reality. If you want to go off to a fantasy, you're on your own. It's like the Truman Show. I do not want to live in the Truman Show. I want to live in the reality where there's beauty and pain, where people are born and people die, and I'm on my way to that same fate, and I have to deal with it all because it's helping me become who I am. Difficulties generate points of decision. Don't run from them. Difficulties can be self-generated or no fault of our own. It's okay. If you create your own problem, don't think, I got myself into this mess. I'm going to have to, right? And I'm going to get out of it as fast as I can. No, don't run away from the mess. And then let me just give you one more before we close up. I'm telling you, difficulties will come. If you're not in the midst of one now, just give it a couple of minutes. It could be something as simple as traffic on the way home. Something, and one of the fun things to do is, have you heard about these websites, first world problem websites? Where third world developing countries kind of give us some perspective on what real problems are. They have a third world people read first world problems, and there's this little boy somewhere in Africa, Kenya perhaps, and he's reading this script written by an American little boy or a little girl, and he's saying, I hate it when my cell phone cord won't reach to my bed and I have to get up to send a text. And he's saying it, in rags and a bloated stomach, right? And the point is, that's really not a problem. So first of all, we've got to reset the bar of what a difficulty is. Okay? It's not a difficulty when the Giants lose. It's not a difficulty if Steph Curry broke his leg yesterday, his foot. Now, hopefully he didn't. Now, that may be a difficulty. That's not really a problem, right? I mean, it is in some worlds. But it's not really. Difficulties will come. John 16, Jesus said this. In this world, this cosmos, the order of things, the way this world works, you will have difficulties. But, he says, cheer up. I have overcome them. In other words, it's going to be okay. Rich Mullins was an amazing songwriter and musician who was killed. He writes this song. There's bound to come some troubles in your life, but that ain't nothing to be afraid of. You know there's bound to come some trouble in your life, but that ain't no reason to fear. I know there's bound to come some troubles to your life, but reach out to Jesus, hold on tight. He's been there before, and he knows what it's like. You'll find him there. That's where I always find him. Now, he may be asleep in the stern, but his sleeping isn't because he's apathetic. It's because he's filled with peace. Let me give you one more example. My favorite. Luke chapter 2. We get this one story about Jesus' childhood. He's 12. 12-year-old little boy. It's awesome. Now, he is really interested in God and what the temple has to do with God. And once a year, his parents and the whole gang from Nazareth makes a trip to Jerusalem. It's not a small trip, and it's not an easy trip. They caravan, okay? They caravan, but they're not in a caravan. And they come to Jerusalem, and they do their thing. They have to have the Passover there, and they make a sacrifice, and Jesus is looking around, and he's like, holy smokes, this is unbelievable. Now, you have to understand, the temple made a modern, enclosed stadium seem tiny. It was monumental. The temple was a building that went from here to Vintage Oaks to the San Marino exit and back. It did. It's that big. Colonnades and room after room, and there was smoke coming out of it because of burnt sacrifices. They had a whole plumbing system underneath it that would take away the blood from these burnt sacrifices. People were walking around. You have to understand that there's hundreds of thousands of people moving around. It's 90 degrees. There's nothing but dust in the air. Priests are coming out of these inner sanctums covered with blood. And people are speaking 10 different languages, and that's the temple. Now, you think that's interesting to a 12-year-old boy? Oh my gosh. Of course. It's like, and so he finds this spot in the middle of all of this clamor, in this area called Solomon's Porch, which is a covered colonnade. There's these beautiful columns where rabbis would sit and teach. And he lost himself listening. Mary and Joseph left. Mary thought Joseph had him. Joseph thought Mary had him. Have you ever lost a child that way? Well, you don't have to feel bad because they lost God's kid. Right? Like, I thought you had him. I thought you had him. Oh, boy. Imagine. Well, really, I mean, they get a day's journey away, and they go, okay. There's a whole family traveling together. He's here somewhere. They get to camp for the night, no Jesus. Mary and Joseph are like, oh, my gosh. I mean, imagine. He's 12. They come back to Jerusalem, so there's 2 days they don't have him, and it takes them a day to find them, 3 days. They finally find him in the temple. And Luke says in Luke 2, he's sitting with the teachers asking good questions. And they look at him, and Mary says this, "Why have you treated us like this?" That's an interesting question. Now, we don't have time to go into Christology here, but Jesus seems to be being kind of selfish. Luke says, Jesus said, "Didn't you understand I have to be about my Father's business?" And Mary and Joseph look at each other and go, "I don't know what you're talking about, but you are in such big trouble." It's true. And so the scripture says, "And Jesus became obedient to them and went home with them to Nazareth, and he," here it is, "grew in wisdom, stature, favor with God, and in favor with man." Now, we've talked about this years ago. That word "grew" is a Greek word that's a blacksmith word. It's the word prokopto. And you know what it means? To heat with fire and beat with a hammer to shape. That's how we're shaped, friends. You're a hunk of steel, and you have to be shoved into the fire, and you have to be beat with a hammer. And the hotter it gets, and the more the beating goes, the sharper you become. It's just the way it goes. And Jesus went through it. First Corinthians 12, and this is it for me. The Apostle Paul had some kind of an issue. Now, the Apostle Paul wrote half the New Testament. I mean, he's quite a guy. But he had some kind of an issue that was keeping him from being his best self, he thought. Keeping him from being effective, efficient, productive. Now, those are big words for us, right? I want to be more effective. I want to be more efficient. I want to be more productive. And so Paul says, there was given to me this horrible malady. Some people think it was bad eyesight. We don't know what it was. And Paul says it was a thorn. It's a thorn in the flesh. It's something that's really bothersome. And 3 times I went to God and said, "Father, please remove this thing from me. I could be such a better church planter, a better pastor. I could be a better writer. I could do more work. I could be so much more effective if you just took this away from me." And God said, "Not going to do it. Because listen to this. This is what he says. My grace is made perfect in your weakness." Wow. This is the counterintuitive way of life. We want to become stronger, more self-reliant. God says, so Paul says, "So I will more willingly glory in my infirmities so that the power of the Christ one will dwell in me." And I think it's because of this. We don't like weaknesses, do we? We want to deny them and cover them up and make up for them. When you embrace it, when you embrace weakness, whatever it is, and still know that God loves you, you begin to get a clue about how life works. God doesn't love you because you're good enough, fast enough, smart enough, sinless enough. That's just such a sad misunderstanding of who God is. I say to people, you can come to church. I got a few things to work on, but when I get that straightened out, I'll come. I'm like, okay, good luck with that. Embracing weakness. See, that's what difficulties do, is they show you your weaknesses. You embrace them, and you know you're loved, and you can just relax. Whether the stuff that you're in is your fault or not your fault, it doesn't matter. It's a gift. Embrace it. Don't run from it. Let it do its work in you. And you will be in the process of prokopto. So, Father, help us. Help us be grateful for the difficulties That's all I can say, God. Amen. Have a good day, you guys.
1, 2, 3, 4, get my shoes and out the door. 5, I'm alive. 6, 7, 8, feeling great. 9, gonna shine, life is good. I'm doing fine. 10, gonna do it right and do it again, yeah. I look into the sky with all the beautiful color, but there's more than just for me, so gonna share it with another. I got to show, to give, let out. I want to sing and shout. Take a look and see a beautiful morning that turns into a beautiful evening, and together make a beautiful life. And if you wanna see, then come along with me, that's right. And if you want a good tomorrow, it's pretty simple, gotta find a light to follow. And if you do, you have a future real bright. And it's a combination of consistency, come on.